I am really impressed with Soulcalibur VI. You can read my full review on digitallydownloaded.net for the full take on the game, but I wanted to use this video to address the real key strength about this game for me, and that is its accessibility. It is really an accessible fighting game. And I know in fighting games it's quite easy to dismiss accessibility as something negative. By nature, fighting games are such a competitive genre that the more committed fans want something that's going to really let them demonstrate their skills, and anything that aims for a broader audience is generally seen as inferior as a result. But I think that Soulcalibur VI is the better for its accessibility, especially given that it's a 3D fighter. 3D fighting games have a habit of being quite dense and technical. You only need to look at the likes of Tekken to see what I mean there. Even Dead or Alive, which was previously seen to be the accessibility fighter and pitched itself as an accessible fighting game, looks like it's going to be aiming to offer something much more technical and esports worthy, for lack of a better term, with Dead or Alive 6. But Soulcalibur 6 lets you jump right in and bash away at the buttons and have a great time. Right from the outset, for example, the difficulty levels are so much less intense than in most other fighting games. With all this footage that you're seeing on the screen in front of you, this is all the hard difficulty settings. So there are 4 difficulty settings: easy, normal, hard, very hard. This is all hard, and as you can see, it is not exactly the most challenging hard mode in a fighting game that you'll come across. There's only one difficulty setting higher, very hard, and while that one will certainly test people, I'm quite impressed that the developers let people jump right in and play without feeling like they need to spend the first couple of weeks with their game on the easiest difficulty setting. And for people that want that higher level of challenge, there is of course online play and competitive local play, where you kind of get to pitch yourself against other players that are of a similar level of skill to you. But the AI itself is toned to a point where it's designed around the accessibility factor. The other thing that makes Soulcalibur VI really accessible in my view is the presence of the weapons, and I'll explain. With most fighting games, when you get taken to the character select screen, for the most part you have no real idea of who can do what. If there's a really big physically character, you know that they're probably going to be the slower, heavy hitting characters. But most characters are of a more normal size, and so the only way to really get a feel for which of the characters you're going to like to play is to play with every single one of them. And I find that to be a tedious process if you're new to the franchise, and it really makes it hard to get into the game in those earlier stages, when you just kind of want to really jump in and start bashing away. Having to figure out which character you like first is counterintuitive, I guess, to the appeal of the game. But the weapons in Soulcalibur really clue you into what each character can do from the very outset. Before you've even started the first match, you can kind of figure out where each character really sits. If you've never played a Soulcalibur game before, you know that Talon's probably going to be a fast, light character because her weapons are kind of tiny. Meanwhile, you know that Raphael will probably have reach because he's got a longer sword, and he'll still strike fast because it's one of those dueling rapiers. Seung Mina, who also has reach just like Raphael, has a bulkier weapon with her spear, so you know instantly that your job is less about ducking in and out with lightning fast strikes as you would with Raphael, and more about keeping a distance between yourself and your opponent. The game never explains any of this, of course, but it's just that visual clue, it's that instant impression you get from looking at the character. You have a much better sense of how they're going to play. And I saw this play out when I was testing Soulcalibur VI for review. I played it a bit in local multiplayer, or played it quite a lot actually, in local multiplayer, including with people who weren't familiar with Soulcalibur series at all, who'd never played one of the games in the series at any point. And people were finding their preferred character much more quickly than in games like Tekken, or even Dead or Alive. And that meant we were able to move to the fun side of the fighting game much more quickly. Because people had found their favourite characters and they picked their mains as such, we were ready to start learning how to make more spectacular tricks with them and get that kind of early level practice in, so that the contests were not just about whacking buttons and hoping for the best. Pretty soon we were there trying to work out how to actually play with these characters, and that was because people were able to find their favourite character much more quickly. Now, of course, none of this is to suggest that Soulcalibur doesn't have depth. And I know the moment that I say accessibility, and I've talked a lot about accessibility in this video, it's where people jump into the assumption that there's nothing to this game if they're an experienced fighting game person. But there is clearly a lot of depth to Soulcalibur VI as well, with rich combo systems for each character, and plenty of moves to work through and figure out which is the right move, and plenty of tactics to figure out which is the right time to use certain abilities and so on. And because there's such a strong disadvantage between the different ranges and speeds of weapons, there's also a real learning process and thrill in learning how to get your favourite character to the point where they can compensate for their weaknesses when they're in a poor matchup. So there is depth. I just want to make it quite clear that I talk about accessibility as a real strength of Soulcalibur, and it is the real strength of Soulcalibur as far as I'm concerned, but there is depth there as well. I do think that the developers missed a couple of critical opportunities to really drive home that accessibility nature though. Characters could use more amusing costumes for a start. One of the things that I've found that has really drawn new players into Dead or Alive over the years has been being able to dress their characters up with the most ridiculous costumes. And it feels weird that Soulcalibur can't even compete with the relatively dry and competitive Tekken for costume options. I know Dead or Alive, most of the costumes are locked behind DLC, but even if you never purchased any of the DLC, there was still some basic costumes that you could unlock just by playing. And I put a lot of time into Soulcalibur, and if there are costumes to unlock and stuff, haven't really come across them. There's a couple of customization options for the single player characters that you can create, or the creatable characters, but the default characters here, the ones that you're watching me play with, they're all kind of stuck with their basic characters. Costumes. I assume there's going to be DLC down the track, but it would have been nice to have something to unlock in the immediate term. The lack of a screenshot mode is also a real bummer. Soulcalibur hits all the right notes with regards to character design and fan service, or to put it in another way, it's an eclectic bunch of characters and they're pretty damn sexy. There's a real draw card to the overall Soulcalibur experience to have those really interesting characters and great designs. So it's a bit disappointing that Bandai hasn't given us the tools to really play around with them and take photos and so on. Any game that has a strong visual component to it really should have a photo mode in this day and age. There's no real excuses there. But overall, I think Soulcalibur VI is a really great example of how to give players an easy and accessible introduction to 3D fighting games, while also giving them enough of a reason to continue playing that game into the future. I have no idea how this is going to sit with the more competitive elements of the fighting game community. That's really not my beat. I love fighting games, though I'm not very good at them. And I find that this one hits the right balance between being something that I personally can enjoy by myself and something that I can play with local multiplayer without anybody feeling like they're uncomfortably out of their depth. Whether it's me or whether it's somebody I'm playing with, nobody really feels like they haven't got a chance of, pulling out a victory as such. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for tuning in to the videos as always, and be sure to check out the full review of the game at digitallydownloaded.net. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you at my next video. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.